Good evening. I'm Jim Lehrer in Washington.
And I'm Robert MacNeil in New York. After the news summary this Thursday, we examined two aspects of the Iran-Contra investigation. Has the Claire George trial compromised the CIA? And should the special prosecutor continue to pursue high officials from the Reagan administration? Also tonight, reports from Florida and Louisiana on the distress after Hurricane Andrew.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the NewsHour is also provided by AT&T and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Hurricane Andrew's victims tried to cope without many of life's basic necessities again today. Relief efforts were strained to the breaking point as thousands lined up for food and water across South Florida. Officials now estimate some 50,000 people were left homeless after Andrew struck Monday. Property damage has been put between $15 to $20 billion in Dade County alone. Distribution efforts continued to be hampered by blocked roads and downed power lines. A small plane carrying relief aid crashed into a house in Miramar, just north of Miami. 2 people aboard the plane were killed, a third was injured. Florida Governor Lawton Chiles said relief efforts were inefficient and inadequate. Dade County's Director of Emergency Management, Kate Hale, said federal help was not getting there fast enough.
If we do not get more food and water into the South End in a very short period of time, we are going to have more casualties because we're going to have people who are dehydrated, who are without food, babies that need formula. Dade County is running these distribution sites. We've got the hospitals in place with the help of the Public Health Service and our firefighters. But for God's sakes, would you please cut it out and help us out down here?
The hurricane has claimed at least 20 lives in Florida, the Bahamas, and Louisiana. The remnants of the storm drenched Mississippi with heavy rain today, prompting flood warnings. At least 5 tornadoes were spotted in central and northern parts of the state, but there were no reports of major damage. In Louisiana, hundreds of people remained homeless today. At least 160,000 homes and businesses are still without power. Officials said it would be 2 days before damage estimates were available. We'll have more on the story later in the program. Jim?
The nation's economic growth slowed in the second quarter of the year. The Commerce Department said today the gross domestic product grew at a 1.4% annual rate from April to June. That was less than half the 2.9% growth recorded in the first quarter. The report said a drop in consumer spending was the main reason.
On the campaign trail today, President Bush traveled to Missouri and Ohio. He began in St. Louis, where he toured a factory which makes safety equipment for law enforcement agencies. The company sells a third of its products abroad. Mr. Bush accused his Democratic opponent, Bill Clinton, of fear-mongering on trade policy and said he failed to take a definitive stand on the newly negotiated North American Free Trade Agreement.
My opponents see us knock down trade barriers and they say, hold everything. They say us open new markets for American goods, and they say, wait a minute, maybe we can't compete. Maybe the American worker can't cut it. So let's pull down the blinds, lock the doors, hope the world goes away. Let me tell them something that you already know in this plant. The American worker doesn't have to hide from anybody. Americans can outwork, outthink, outcompete anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Governor Clinton responded by saying that he supports expanding trade and investment. In the past, he said he also supports the concept of North American free trade, but wanted to analyze the impact of the new agreement on wages and the environment. Clinton and his running mate, Senator Al Gore, were in San Antonio, Texas today to kick off their latest bus tour. At a rally, Clinton criticized Mr. Bush's Houston acceptance speech and his economic policies.
The thing the president did a great job of was blame Congress. He said, what do you expect us to do? We just had the White House for 12 years. It's all Congress's fault. If I'd have said stuff like that when I was a little boy, my mama would have spanked me. When George Bush sent his budget down this year, it was so bad, so totally without thought, integrity, that 3/4 of the Republicans in Congress opposed it. Now, he didn't tell you that in Houston, did he?
Vice President Quayle and Governor Clinton traded accusations about financial contributors today. Mr. Quayle said Clinton was totally in the pocket of trial lawyers who contributed heavily to his campaign. Clinton said big-moneyed special interests have used the vice president's Council on Competitiveness to get whatever they want done.
Pentagon officials said today Iraq offered no resistance to the new Allied no-fly zone. The United States, Britain, and France have banned Iraqi aircraft from flying south of the 32nd parallel beginning today. The action was taken to protect Shiite Muslims from attack by the Iraqi army. Mideast talks in Washington ended for the week today with both sides still far apart. Palestinian officials said the new Israeli government had offered a change in tone, but proposals that were little different from the old hardline government. Negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, Syrians, Jordanians, and Lebanese will resume on Monday.
A two-day international conference on the civil war in Yugoslavia ended in London today with an ultimatum but no peace accord. The U.S., Britain, and other major powers called on Serbia and Montenegro to end the bloodshed in Bosnia or face tougher UN sanctions and international isolation. Bosnia's Serbs did agree to put their heavy guns under UN control and yield some of their territorial gains. British Prime Minister John Major said a new round of peace talks would open in Geneva next week. Officials also announced that several thousand more UN troops would be sent to Bosnia to protect relief efforts. Shelling continued in Sarajevo despite the talks. 3 people were killed and 20 others wounded when mortars fell in a residential area. It was, by Sarajevo standards, a relatively quiet day. That's our summary of the news. Just ahead, the Iran-Contra investigation and the pain from Hurricane Andrew.
The search for villains and justice in the Iran-Contra case is our lead story tonight. It is there because of Claire George, the former chief of Central Intelligence Agency's clandestine service. He was tried in a Washington federal court on charges of lying to Congress about various aspects of the Iran-Contra affair. But the jury deadlocked and was unable to reach a verdict. Yesterday, the judge declared a mistrial. The arguments over the George case are more than legal and are only a part of the larger debate about the Iran-Contra prosecutions. Our examination of it all begins with the trial itself and with a reporter who covered it, Time Magazine's chief national security correspondent, Bruce Van Voorst. Bruce, going in, the case against George was considered open and shut. Here's what he knew, here's what he said he knew. What happened?
That's correct. At the beginning, when this trial opened, the independent prosecutor, Walsh, felt that he had an open and shut case practically, and there were grounds for believing this. On the one hand, George has said that he knew nothing about the Hassenfuss crash, the resupply plane to the Contras, as far as it related to the agency. George also claimed that he didn't know General Secord, for example, when in fact it was quite demonstrable that he had met Secord in the White House Situation Room before that. Finally, they had, as a very good witness against George, Alan Fires, who was his deputy and worked closely with him in the agency, and who was prepared to testify that George, in fact, knew far more than he had told Congress when they met. What happened during the course of the trial was really very interesting because although these points were established to some extent, the jury came around to taking a very narrow interpretation of what George's responsibility was in talking to Congress. They were asking whether he had to tell everything when he was asked. And it turns out, of course, that the Congress, in these hearings, the congressmen were not very specific and very precise in their questioning.
So the question was, did he have an obligation under the law to volunteer various things? Is that right?
Exactly that. And on top of that...
in other words, if I say, did you have a hamburger for lunch? And you say yes, but I don't ask you about the French fries, and you're not in violation of the law.
And I can't go to jail for not telling you about the French fries.
Okay.
Of course, a lot of this reflects at the same time George's basic reluctance to share with the Congress. And I think this is something traditional in the ethos of the generation that he represents. But nevertheless, he was able to make the case quite successfully. And as we understand it, the jury was, for the most part, a majority for acquittal on all 9 counts. He was able to survive on that.
What was his basic defense?
A number of things. First of all, that he is not, that the most critical thing is a spin-off from what you just said, and that is that he says he was not required to tell in great detail more than he was being asked, and that the congressman just didn't ask specifically the questions. Secondly,
why does he say he was not obligated to tell the Congress of the United States everything that he knew?
That's his philosophical position vis-a-vis Congress, and that's an attitude shared by a lot of people in the agency as well. He says, too, that he was very busy at this time. He was dealing with a lot of other clandestine operations, that this wasn't as high on his radar screen as it might be when he sat in the jury room. He also, of course, suggests that some things were kept from him. Bill Casey, after all, was also instrumental in running these operations.
Of course, he was George's boss.
George's boss, right? In a sense, George is arguing that he was caught, and the agency was caught, between a president who wanted to run an operation in support of the Contras and a Congress that was somewhat ambivalent, but nevertheless basically passing legislation to prevent this.
Well, did it go around, did the final fact that the jury couldn't reach a decision, was it on the basis that not so much whether or not he did it, but whether or not it was a violation of the law that he did it? In other words, what he was charged with doing.
That's specifically right, because the jury just decided that in this very nuanced area, the gray area of what he was supposed to tell Congress, that he had in fact fulfilled his constitutional, his legal responsibilities. I think that the most telling thing I heard, we were very lucky, by the way, the foreman of the jury, Stephen Kirk, was a very articulate and very intelligent observer. And he said afterwards something that I think is really the core of it. He said, as a citizen, I would like that my senior officials were much more candid and open in talking to Congress. As a juror, I cannot expect I have to give him the benefit of the doubt with respect to whether he fulfilled
this particular man in this particular case.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Now, is this a real thing, this decision to retry him again beginning October the 19th?
That's difficult to say. Certainly, Judge Walsh intends to do that, and his prosecuting attorney Craig Gillum, who handled the courtroom for him, is determined to go ahead. Now, Hybe, the defense lawyer, has raised some questions. He points out that there was never a majority for conviction here. In fact, it was the other way around. And so he raises questions whether it's legitimate to go ahead with a retrial under these circumstances.
But is it solely up to the independent prosecutor? So, I mean, it doesn't matter what the defense says, right?
No, but they will have some discussions, I suspect. But
sure.
It's very important to Walsh to pursue this because he's got these other cases upcoming.
Yeah. Well, look, let's bring into the discussion now former CIA Director William Colby and former Democratic Congressman Michael Barnes, who chaired the House Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere Affairs from 1981 to 87. He held hearings on the Iran-Contra affair and helped instigate the congressional investigation of it. First, Mr. Colby, do you believe that the prosecution against Claire George should now proceed?
I do not think it should have started. I think you're seeing here a jury doing that one thing that a jury is for, not automatically to apply a decision, but to use its good sense of the community as to whether this man should be convicted. That's what they felt. They looked at it as human beings. They said, no, he should not be convicted. This was a major political fight between the Congress and the president. And what has happened as a result? The president has not been accused. Bill Casey, of course, has died. North and Poindexter, both have been reversed on appeal. So who are we prosecuting? Some middle-level CIA officers, not for what they did, but for what they didn't say. They're not being prosecuted for having violated Congress's rules of behavior. They're being prosecuted because they didn't come up and tattle on it. Now, the CIA is not a law enforcement agency. And we've had that problem before. We had edges of Watergate before it happened. We didn't know what it was all about. But it wasn't our role to run over and make a big stir about it right away.
Explain to the average American why it isn't the role of a government employee to tell the Congress of the United States what in the world is going on.
Well, it does have that obligation. I'm the guy who told them, perhaps more than anybody, so I'm sympathetic with that point. But as I understand it, the relationship between the committees and the CIA is really pretty good now, under Webster and under Gates. There is a full sharing of the facts of what CIA is doing. But CIA is not running out to find out whether some other crime is being committed, that it's none of its business. It's going to stay out of that kind of thing because the law says it shall not be engaged in law enforcement. Zero.
Mr. Barnes, how do you feel about this? Do you think, first of all, that it was proper to prosecute Claire George to begin with? Do you believe he was in violation of the law and should go to jail for, or at least be tried for it?
Well, if the prosecutor, the independent prosecutor in this case, had evidence that the crime was committed by this individual, then he had a responsibility to prosecute him. You've got a question now, having presented that evidence to a jury and having the foreman of the jury tell us that they never could get a majority of the jury to support conviction.
Look,
You've got
I
a
didn't mean
question
to be
as to
so...
whether, whether it should go forward. But these are very important issues that we're talking about here. The foreman of the jury apparently understood that when saying, as a citizen, he would like to see CIA officials and other government officials tell the truth to Congress. He understood that there's a basic democratic principle here, and that is that an agency like the Central Intelligence Agency should not be doing what they were doing. If anybody is to be wrong, if anybody is to believe Oliver North or Mr. Poindexter or all the other testimony that we've heard about this, we know that Mr. Casey and other officials of the United States government at the highest levels were violating the law purposefully, knowing they were doing it. This was a law passed by the Congress and signed by his boss, the President of the United States.
You're talking about the law
which prohibited their actions.
Right.
And not only did they engage in these activities, but that they then repeatedly lied when I and other members of Congress asked them, are you doing it? I asked Mr. Casey, for example, about the Hassenfuss plane. Did the Central Intelligence Agency know anything about this? No. Did you seek to find out anything about it? American citizens flying around Central America with weapons? No. Clear lies, we now know, in retrospect, and Mr. Casey's death was rather timely.
But where does Claire George fit into this? As an employee of Bill Casey and of the American people, et cetera, what should he have done from your perspective that he did not do?
Well, he should have answered the questions honestly and truthfully. If democracy means anything, it means that the elected representatives of the people, the President of the United States and the members of the Congress, have a responsibility to oversee the FBI and the Defense Department and the Central Intelligence Agencies and others. And there's no way they can do their job if they're lied to repeatedly as they were, as we were repeatedly with respect to this policy all through the 1980s.
Mr. Colby.
We're still talking not about what CIA was doing. We're talking about what Oliver North and Poindexter and various others on their independent off-the-shelf operation. Casey may well have been involved in that, but he clearly said, you guys stay out of this. The CIA, you stay out of it. And there are only about 2 or 3 instances where North asked that one of our people pass a message, a couple of things like that. Now, the CIA realized that something was going on at a very high level in the American government, supported by the President, and it wasn't going to get in the middle of the fight between the Congress and the President. And that's why they pushed the subject away as far as they could.